Hey everyone, welcome back to Redshift Media. Today we're diving into the basics of camera settings to help you take better photos and videos. So you decided to upgrade from your smartphone and now you have a shiny new digital camera, but you don't know what all the bits and bobs are and where to start with the settings. In today's video, we're going to cover some quick basics to bring you up to speed now that you've graduated from your cell phone to a more advanced camera. So let's jump in. First up, let's talk about the mode dial. On this dial, you'll find modes like Auto, Program, which is typically labeled P, Aperture Priority, which is labeled A or AV, Shutter Priority, which is labeled S or TV, and Manual, which is usually labeled M. For beginners, I recommend starting with Auto to let the camera do the work, then gradually begin exploring the other modes. But since you're here, you want to know all you can about the other settings, so let's expand our horizons a little. To understand the mode dial better, we first need to talk about the three basic things this dial controls. The foundational principles of photography revolve around what is called the exposure triangle. These are the three cornerstones of photography that all cameras and photographers work with to create images, whether it's low light, sports, portraits, or landscapes. Understanding these three settings will help you build a foundation to take your photography to the next level. We'll start with ISO. ISO controls your camera's sensitivity to light. A lower ISO, like 100 or 200, is best for bright conditions, where a higher ISO, 400, 800, or more, works better for low light. But one thing to remember is higher ISO values can introduce noise or grain into your photos. This can be a concern as higher noise means less detail. Another thing to know about high ISO is that you start to lose some color detail the higher you go. Because of this, I try to keep my ISO settings below 1000 or even 800 in most all situations, except when the light is really low. The size of the sensor in your camera also plays into how high you should go on your ISO settings. My wife has a crop sensor camera that she uses for wildlife images, but because the sensor in her camera is much smaller than my full frame sensor, she starts dealing with noisy images sooner than I do when the light starts to fade. The smaller your camera sensor is, the more prone to high noise it becomes. A good rule to get around this is to try to keep it below 1000 in most situations where possible if you have a crop sensor, and about 1600 for full frame. This has served me well as a starting point for deciding how high to push my ISO in low light. To set your camera's ISO, you typically go into the camera's menu, find the ISO settings, and select the desired value. It's as easy as that. Some cameras allow you to set the maximum ISO your camera can go so that you can make sure you do not exceed the threshold you set as a photographer. Refer to your camera's manual to find out where your ISO settings can be found. Now let's talk about aperture, which is represented by F numbers, like f2.8, f5.6, f8, and so on. The aperture controls the amount of light entering the camera, and it affects the depth of field. A lower f number, which means a wider aperture, lets in more light and creates a blurrier background, which is perfect for portraits. Photographers often refer to lenses with low aperture values, or f-stops, as fast because they let in lots of light quickly. An example of a fast lens would be an f2.8 or f1.4. Remember, the lower the number, the more light it can let in. On the other side of the spectrum, a higher f number, or narrower aperture, lets in less light and keeps more of your scene in focus, which is ideal for landscapes. Photographers call lenses with higher minimum f numbers like 3.5 or 4 as slow lenses. If you've just purchased your first real camera and you bought it in a kit, it will most likely have a lens that's a bit on the slow side, usually having f numbers starting in the mid 3s to low 4s, such as f3.5 or f4. These are not necessarily bad lenses, but just understand they don't let in a lot of light quickly, so they're not going to be suitable for certain low light photography like night shots of the sky or indoors without a flash. Many photographers will begin upgrading their lenses before any other gear to ones that provide more light to the camera's sensor. Professional photographers spend lots of money to get lenses that go as fast as possible. It's not uncommon for low f number lenses like f2.8 or lower to sell for thousands of dollars. But don't worry about that now. You'll likely get aperture fever as a photographer. Trust me, photographers always want faster lenses. The latest cell phones have started to use software tricks and AI to replicate blurry backgrounds and provide the ability to take pictures in near total darkness. And you can take some truly impressive low light pictures with just a cell phone, like this one of the recent aurora display here in Utah. But generally speaking, serious photographers use lenses with low aperture numbers that are fast instead of software. There really is no comparison when you put them side by side. To adjust the aperture, turn the dial on your camera while your camera dial is set to aperture priority or manual mode until you reach the desired f number. Remember, the lower the f number, the more light you're letting in, and the higher number you set, the less light you're letting in. This seems to confuse beginning photographers a lot. If you can master this one quickly, you'll have more success choosing the right settings for your camera in a wide range of lighting situations. Last but not least is shutter speed. This controls how long the camera's sensor is exposed to light. Faster shutter speeds, like 1/1000th of a second, are great for freezing action, while slower speeds, like 1/30th of a second, can create motion blur, which is perfect for creative shots or low light situations. I use slow shutter speeds on my nighttime photography shoots when capturing accent lighting on homes for my real estate clients. Using slow shutter speed allows you to do amazing things like capture the tail of a comet or the subtle colors of the Milky Way. But one thing to know is the slower you go with your shutter speed, the more you risk having a blurry photo, unless you have your camera on a sturdy tripod. We'll do entire videos on low light photography using slow shutter speeds, so if you're interested in that, watch for those videos on the channel to learn more. On the other side of this setting is a fast shutter speed. Nothing's more frustrating to a photographer who's shooting wildlife, thinking they got the shot, and then finding out after looking at the pictures that everything's blurry, either because the photographer moved or the subject did. There are rules of thumb to use with shutter speed which go beyond the scope of this video, but one quick tip is to have a shutter speed that is the reciprocal of the length of your lens to keep things in focus. This means if I'm using a 24mm lens, I need to have a shutter speed of at least 1/30th of a second to help make sure my shot is in focus. Now, this is just a general place to start, and you'll have to learn through experience the situations where you can bend this rule, but it's a good jumping off point. Most modern mirrorless cameras have image stabilization built in that stabilizes the image by moving the sensor or the glass elements in your lens during longer exposures. This completely blows the reciprocal rule out of the water. I've taken handheld shots shooting a 600mm lens in low light conditions with a shutter speed as low as 1/20th of a second because the image stabilization in my mirrorless camera was so good. Without image stabilization, I would have needed a minimum shutter speed of at least 1/1000th of a second to even think of having an in-focused image. This is an extreme example, but if you have enough experience, you just might be able to pull it off with a modern mirrorless camera. When you're first starting out, however, use this rule as a guide to help you with where to set your shutter speed. Faster than the reciprocal of your lens should give you a good starting point for sharper images. Now, everything I've just said is assuming that your subject is not moving. If I'm shooting a bird in flight with a 24mm lens, 1/30th of a second probably won't be sufficient to freeze the motion of that bird. But we'll take a deeper dive into shutter speeds in another video. Adjusting shutter speed is simple. Just go to your camera's menu, find the shutter speed setting, and choose the value you need. Many cameras like my Canon R6 Mark II have a dial that allows you to quickly adjust this setting without going into a menu, but your camera may not. So check your manual to understand how to set shutter speed, and just remember that the faster you go, the less light you let in. So you will need to compensate for less light getting to your sensor by letting more light in with your f number setting or by raising your ISO to a higher number. There are always trade-offs when using a camera, and it can get complicated balancing shutter speed, f-stops, and ISO. But this should give you a good foundation from which to start experimenting and learning how these three basic settings work together. And there you have it. Those are the basics of camera settings: ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. Understanding and mastering these principles will take your photography to the next level. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe if you like what you see on my channel. It really helps me to bring more content to others who are just starting their journey with photography. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.